Kathryn Lundgren is showing me. Go ahead, Kathryn. Explain what you're pointing to.
I'm showing you where they actually found it, which was right below this area, about perhaps 1.5 feet below. They found a commodity, a radioactive hot commodity, underneath this pavement. I believe it was January 29th, and it was Gilbane, which is a subcontractor through Tetra Tech and Shaw and CBI, who are subcontracting under the U.S. Navy. I believe it was the U.S. Navy who was doing, or required to do, the towed arrays back in November. It's called a towed array because it's pulled, so it's towed behind the machinery, the detection device, the Geiger counter.
Okay.
So they call it a towed array, and it goes through and in and out of your lawn areas and then records the data.
So this is how we detected gamma radiation. We had our gamma detectors. So this would be the detector. You've seen these around the neighborhood, and this is just the motor that we use to make sure that it goes at a steady speed. And this is the technician, and then he's recording all the data on his computer, and we also have it hooked up to a GPS unit. So each measurement is hooked up to an exact location, so we can always go back there and find that location. We covered more than 2.8 million square feet of the surface area, and we collected more than 1.5 million data points.
So they would have recorded this, I think they did our street back in November, is when they ended that 2-month series of tests on the island.
Okay. The U.S. Navy.
Yes.
They're committed to doing tests to find radioactive stuff. They had a gizmo called a towed array, and they dragged it along this sidewalk, and it was the hot spot was right here where you were pointing. But in the photograph, you show a canister, don't you? Isn't that in that photograph?
Yes. There are the police right there, stopping, slowing, watching.
All right.
Interesting.
If you ever see them, point them out. I want to get them on camera so we can. Did they dig the canister out of the ground? Is that what happened? Is that why you were standing in the photograph pointing at this thing?
When I pointed it out, it appeared as if it had been previously under the ground. It was completely dirty. It was on top of a freshly laid pile of dirt on the outside of one of the sites. So I'm assuming, and one can only assume, because their habit in the past was to dig do the testing, dig the trenches, and then they would move the soil to the side. Then they would, because we complained, they didn't do this always, but recently they've started putting plastic bags over plastic liner over the top, and then taking the pipes and the objects from underneath, the rocks, the heavy objects, and just putting them on top of the plastic.
No, this is the stuff they find that's radioactive. What you're describing, the pipes or whatever.
I don't know if they determined those were unsafe, but the fact that they were in the ground along with the radiation being emitted, one can only assume that it has some level of it in it. And it's just not wise to do that. Even if it isn't, it doesn't appear correct as a correct process. One wouldn't take... Hi, how are you, Pandora? Sorry. Hi, guys. One doesned take something next to something else that is dangerous, and because it could have had contact with it at some point in time.
The pipe that you showed in the photograph, why were you pointing at it?
Because it's a process that they were using. It was the method that they were using that's in question. It's a number of meetings explaining to them that you can't take something that is even close in proximity to a radioactive commodity or potential reading and remove it and put it on top where people can touch it. and kids can walk on the pile because they climb on dirt piles and touch it. It's
Okay, what was
irrelevant.
radioactive? The area that they found it in?
Right. Like
It was a hot spot.
Yeah.
And they took a piece of metal out of the hot spot and laid it out in the open where kids could, or anybody could access it. And as I understand it, you can get radiation burns from that. People have.
If it's hot enough, yes, you can.
Yeah.
You absolutely can. And if it isn't hot enough, you can still experience an exposure of low dose radiation, which if this is a regular occurrence over time,
Right.
it accumulates. It's a bioaccumulator. It stays in your body.
Okay. Do me one favor now and pose in that exact position. I want to make sure I get a photograph of you posing in the exact position with your cane and not the bat.
Oh.
And I'm not sure that I have a photograph of it yet. Because there's a story there. It's an important story about your neurological reason for having this cane. Great. That's terrific. Okay, let's...
There you go.